Welcome back to another episode of HBTV here on the HoopBall YouTube channel. I am Alan Soroki, joined by my co-hosts for this one. It is another episode here with Brent, the middleman. Brent, how you doing?
Good, Alan. Thanks for having me again. What's up, everybody?
And you've been a busy man on this channel. This is you hit the Jamal Murray news the other day. You and I did that injury show. You are here and you are front and center for this very important time in the fantasy basketball season.
You know what? I'm in the same position everybody else is. I have a bunch of fantasy teams. I have a bunch of injuries. I get as much out of doing these and researching these as I try to give. So, yeah, I'm learning right along with everybody.
And our other co-host for this one is Marcus Braden, back on for just a little bit of a hiatus, but he's back at it with us at another very impactful time. Marcus, man, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here right at the most important time, the fantasy basketball playoffs. This is where the wackiness starts, and this is where those unsung heroes, the guys we least expected, start getting extended run and end up winning our league. So, you don't want to miss a beat. That's for sure.
I have a soft spot in my heart for Jordan Crawford, who helped lead me to my first fantasy basketball championship all those years ago. He had one hell of a run that last 2 weeks. I think he was hitting 30 points a night.
Stretch there. So Malik Monk did that for me like a couple years ago. Was it 3 years ago? Something like that. Malik Monk just went crazy like this time of year, and I'm spacing on the guy's name. He was on the Grizzlies at the time. There was another guy who went nuts for me, and it was like somebody did nothing all year. So I'm waiting to see who that's going to be this year.
Well, we'll all find out together. There's lots of different candidates that it could be.
Marshawn Brooks. It was Marshawn.
Oh, there he is.
Marshawn Brooks. Wow.
The next Kobe.
Yeah. The guy the Suns accidentally traded for, thinking they were getting Dylan Brooks. Remember that story?
Right. Yeah, that was.
They're like, whoa, wait, we thought we were getting Dylan Brooks. We didn't want Marshawn Brooks.
I mean, how far Phoenix has come from that moment?
Seriously, yeah.
So we're gonna get into meetings here. We're just gonna have a nice free-flowing conversation, which y'all are welcome to participate in the comments section. Please drop questions about teams. In relation to if you're in the fantasy playoffs this week, or if you're like the majority of leagues in Yahoo settings starting next week, drop a question. All the details are really important for helping us give you an effective answer, but please join in and, show your support. Drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. We've got another show coming up this week. There's no playoffs in Roto, but the Roto format, just last season stretch. We're going to do a video on that too. That'll be pretty great. So tune in for that one as well. And we're just going to get rolling along here. We have, really, here's what it's all kind of boiling down to. I mean, I'm sure you guys it's a lot of common sense stuff at this time of year. You understand that it's go win or go home when it's the fantasy playoffs, which means that you have to put a very strong emphasis on maximizing the games that your team is playing compared to the other team. If you hold like a 6 game advantage over the team that you're facing, doesn't really matter who those games are coming from. You have a much, much, much stronger chance to win your playoff series. It's just it's the key. And today we're really going to talk about just sort of the strategies that you employ about maximizing your games. You want to sort of understanding the scheduling, how that comes into play, knowing what's going to come up, knowing which guys are worth hanging on to and which ones aren't. And, that's basically all it's going to boil down to. It's just really going to be critical for you to make important decisions here, ruthless decisions on which guys are worth starting, which ones aren't. And, I'm going in circles here. Brent, help me out. Where would you start off on this conversation? In your head-to-head playoffs starting on Monday, what are things that you would do to prepare for that today?
Yeah, and it's good timing because I have some that start Monday and I have some that are already started this week. So in some cases, we're already in the midst of this. But what I'm really looking at is I guess it's one main thing. Who do I have available? Do I have, are they hurt? Do they have games? Are they going to be actually playing next week? We don't know what's going on with these makeup games. Are they going to try to fill those in? So, the big thing right now is injuries. I even read an article today about how the GMs are blaming the schedule and all these, 4-game weeks and 5-game weeks on the injuries or whatever it is. And the way the travel's set up. I don't know. But whatever the case is, we don't care as fantasy people. We just care, like, people are getting hurt. What do we do when our good guys get hurt? And so a good example would be like a guy like Lowry. He keeps sitting out. You look next week, he's only got 2 games next week, I think, so far. What's his situation? If you're on the fence about if you're losing your matchup this week and there is no next week and you have Lowry, you may consider dropping him, because even if you win this, if you pull out this week and get a guy and he only plays 2 games next week, so maybe you get a guy who plays 4 games. A lot of it's dependent on who you're getting, though. Like, I wouldn't drop a Lowry for a guy who couldn't match his 1 game production, and even if he had 4 games next week, because then even 1 game out of Lowry is better than that guy. But you really, you need to look at those 2 things. What is up with their injury? Are they going to be back? And then how many games do they have to play? I don't weigh how many games they have too heavily, because if a guy's good enough, he only needs to get me a couple games during a week to really help my team. But those mid-level guys, maybe a 2-game week has me cut bait on a guy like that and go with a guy who's slightly below average but has more games. So I don't know if that's kind of vague. A lot of it's league dependent and team dependent, but those are things you really need to keep in mind and really kind of get scientific about it when it gets down here to the playoffs. And you're going to have to make some tough decisions. There's going to be some Sophie's choices. You're going to have to let one of them go in some cases. I probably dated myself with the Sophie's choice.
No, I mean, I'd say only mildly. There's far worse ways to date yourself on here. But you're very right. Especially with someone like Kyle Lowry, it's a good example because it's interesting that he's now rested 2 games in a row, 2 nights of a back-to-back. He was rested yesterday against the Hawks. Yeah. The prevailing thought there was that they were just going to go with this schedule with him to just keep him fresh. I guess he was resting the first leg, but he's out again. And that's just going to get real untrustworthy real fast, especially if you with next week, the Raptors only playing 2 games. That's the type of decision right there where you can't just be resting on goose eggs because Lowry's been a top 50 player when he's healthy this season. I mean, Raptors are in a weird spot. We know what the narrative is coming out of that team. They are full on go trying to get into the playoffs. But we understand here, especially with Lowry, he's a pending free agent. He's likely not sticking with the franchise beyond this season. There are elements there as to why am I going to put it all out there for these last stretch of games? And he is someone that if he's on my roster in the head-to-head playoffs, I'm not sure if I'm holding on to him if they're starting next week. It's the type of decision you got to wait and see why he's rested 2 games here, what that rationale might be from Toronto, and whether there's another underlying injury that we don't know about. But that's the type of stuff that you definitely need to focus on. And really,
well, when you see you look at the waiver wire and you see maybe a Ty Jerome sitting there, or Reggie Jackson sitting there, and it's it's not Kyle Lowry production, but it's guaranteed production for the most part. It gets really tempting at that point to cut loose.
Marcus, what about you? So, I mean, let's assume that the playoffs in this hypothetical league of yours is starting next week. Today on Wednesday, what would you be doing to get yourself ready?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, no need to assume here. Mine do start next week. And it's funny you mention that because I'm currently in a matchup. I'm 3rd in my league right now. And the guy who's 1st in my league, we're going head-to-head. And while our battle was kind of even, right? Like yesterday, he had 10 guys play and only had 3. And if you think about that for the rest of the week, he still has the same number of games played. And that difference of players is such a large deficit to overcome. It's got me thinking about playoffs, how, Brent, you had mentioned it and you did as well, Alan, where you're in that week and it's win or go home. So you really have to tailor your acquisitions and the players you have or need to get rid of, rather, between middle of the pack guys or guys sitting out. You need people out there playing. You need them putting up good numbers, especially, in that of a category league. Well, I mean, Roto's no different, right? Once you get the playoffs. So it's you're really streaming to win. And I just think I can't overstate the importance of, depending on your weekly moves, whether it be 4 or 7, you want to not only maximize those, but you want to optimize them, right? For the low volume days and the days where your opponent may have more, because while your team's good or, can compete evenly, just mean flat out, having a less amount of players, that makes all the difference, right? In
Mm-hmm.
terms of like just not being able to make up that production. So with that, I just want to emphasize one of the more valuable pro tips is just as, Brent and you said, some guys who, you may draft early, you have no choice but to drop because you're sitting out, and in that, limited time frame, they're not as valuable. You want to make sure your streams, right, are the Thursday, Friday streams of 1 week are kind of setting you up for that team that plays 4 or 5 games the following week, because you don't want to just waste them all in one time because you got to win the matchup. But you always have to be forward thinking in playoffs, especially if you don't have one of those top 2 seeds, because that means you're the one who doesn't get a bye week. And if you're at that 3rd or 4th spot, you have to really battle just to stay alive and just to win. So, as Brent kind of mentioned with the Raptors, they have 2 games this upcoming week. But the following week, they have 5 games, right? And it may not be a Kyle Lowry or a Fred VanVleet, but if you got that in-between guy who's getting 25, 30 minutes, right, and he's playing all 5 games, that might make all the difference in the fantasy playoff matchup, right? And the same goes for the Mavericks and the Thunder because they have 5 games too. So I just think the biggest 2 things are optimizing those streams, but always being forward-thinking. So the difference about playoffs is when you get to Wednesday and Thursday in one matchup, you got to be thinking about Monday, Tuesday, and the following. So, you kind of want to save some of those moves, and you want to, keep it scientific, like Brent said, and see who's getting the runs, see who's, putting up the per minute numbers and stuff, and always plan ahead because, the closer you get to the end, the more expendable players become. So.
And you touched on a lot of really good stuff there, and like there's so many different directions we can go. I liked the one thing something that you brought up about high volume days versus low volume days, which is another aspect of looking ahead. Is not just about like the real life NBA schedule and like who's playing on what days, like how many games can you get out of a certain team for a given week. You need to look ahead on your own fantasy roster and see how many open slots you might have. At a very important moment like that's going to be coming up next week on Wednesday. 12 teams are going to be there's going to be 12 games, so 24 different teams are going to be playing on that day. Most likely, you're going to have a full slate of players. So it's important, and you can stream in that spot, sure, but you're probably better suited streaming around that day, trying to find holes where you have open roster slots, like on Tuesday where there's only going to be 5 games going on, or Thursday where there's only going to be 6 games going on. So, there's 2 different ways to stream. I mean, you can do it where you're solely focused on the week that you have at hand, and you're like, all right, I don't want to focus on the Raptors next week because they have 2 games. I'd rather focus on the Atlanta Hawks. They have 4. But there's also, and I believe this is trademarked in the HoopBall circles, there's the long streaming method where you look a little farther beyond that. You pick up a guy this next week where they start they have 3 games from Wednesday to Sunday, and then they have 2 games Monday to Tuesday next week. That's 5 games in 7 days. That is maximizing moves that week that will help benefit you in the next week as well. So there's a ton of different angles to look at it. You got to make sure you understand where you have spots to put in new players. A great team next week that's going to be playing on those low volume days is the Charlotte Hornets, for example. They have 4 games all on next week, playing on a Tuesday and a Thursday. They skip over that Wednesday day where there's already 12 games going on. That's a good, especially with all their injuries right now. There's a lot of streamable targets that you can go with there. Jalen McDaniels, he's been crazy good the last, relatively. Over the last week or so, he's getting a ton of opportunity. He helps in a ton of different categories. He's a great guy to pick up in advance for next week if you want those 4 games and you want them on days where he'll really help your team out. Cody Zeller and Bismack Biyombo are getting a ton of run at center without PJ Washington right now. If you need rebounds and blocks, those are 2 guys that are worth targeting. And it's just, even more so, it's just, I think it's important to understand not just how many games in a week that you're going to be getting at, but definitely where they fit on your roster. So to go off of that, Brent, I mean, what would you think? Let me think of how to phrase this question. I mean, what do you think of that strategy? Do you like to employ when you're streaming? Do you like to? How far ahead are you looking to get guys on your roster?
Yeah, I've always been kind of a long streamer. Like I tend to not. I don't like the daily ad drops, and I don't know if it's personality or just I'm busy. Like I have kids and a job, and so I'd like to pick a guy up and know I could keep him for a week or so. But I definitely look ahead. So especially early on in the playoffs, I don't want to waste all my moves, right away. I want to pick up a guy. I want to see how many games does he have left during this week, and then even into next week, am I going to be able to hang on to him? Is he like a 1-game injury replacement? Is he like a Goga Badazzi or something like that? Who, as soon as Turner comes back, he's completely irrelevant. I'd be more hesitant to pick that guy up than I would like. What's a good example right now? Like, I don't know, even like a Reggie Jackson or something, who is probably going to give me pretty consistent production over the next week or so. But then again, I mean, guys like a Badazzi or something. Am I even pronouncing his name right?
I think so. Yeah, you're in the ballpark.
We'll call him Goga. He. That's probably not even right. Anyway, his production's great if he plays, but he's gone as soon as Turner comes back. So. I think am I making a good point here? So there's you pick like I'd rather spend a move on a guy who's going to give me 3 or 4 good games than a guy who's just 1 game and then could be gone, because then all of a sudden I got to go back to the wire. Maybe that other guy's gone already. And then the other thing about what you were talking about, long streamers, is if you play it smart enough, you can get a guy before everyone else realizes they should have got him. At the beginning of the week, someone might go on and be like, "Oh, I need to grab so-and-so. It's all over the HoopBall." And then he's already on your team because you saw that he had a big week next week. You read a blurb somewhere that this injury was more severe than what was being reported. You paid attention to HoopBall and we talked, whatever, get ahead of those. If you're just trying to grab guys one off here and there, you're always going to be like too late to the party. And you're just going to be driving yourself crazy. So that I think I do it more to keep myself sane. I grab guys who I feel are going to play, and the biggest thrill I get is when somebody sends a message through our team group chat or whatever that's like, "How is he on Brent's team already?" Like there's nothing I love more than beating someone to the punch and having everyone realize it later. And the only way to do that is to really pay attention and do your homework.
It's a very good point. I'm sure when you get those messages, I'm sure you just drop a link to the HoopBall Discord and then leave it at that. Nothing else needs to be said.
I pat myself on the back harder than anybody. So.
Marcus, what about gaming your matchups based off of the opponent that you might be going up with? Let's say you have the luxury of knowing exactly who you're going to go up against, the week before you do. Does that alter your strategy at all? Like, do you try and focus on areas that you feel like you can get at them, or do you want to sort of play to your own strengths, or is it a mix of both?
I think it's a mix of both. I think adding on what Brent said, you're grabbing guys and not dropping them right away or making daily moves, but you're aligning your picks with your opponent's schedule, right? Because there may be a low volume day or a high volume day. They could have a mix of players on the same team who fall on the same day, and they have 3 players playing in year 7, right? And you don't even have to make a move that day, or maybe you make one, right? And then you have the upper hand, or vice versa. They could have a lot of more players playing, and you're kind of it forces your hand a little bit. It's like, wait, now all of a sudden I have this player and that player who I'd like to keep and maybe feel out. But if I'm in a dire need to make these moves just so I don't fall behind in the sheer amount of games played, then that's where that forward thinking turns into knowing who your opponent is and how many games you have played fares against theirs. So you definitely have to keep awareness of that, because I find myself, this happens to me all the time, right? You want to make speculative moves. You want to make moves on guys who you get run, who have a good game. Before you know it, you're 3-4 moves in a 7-game, a 7-move week. And then somebody goes down, you don't have the same moves to make. And now you're in a situation where you're missing out and you don't have as many games played, or that one guy who could have been the pickup, the Jamal Crawford, the Marshawn, the Marshawn Brooks, you can't go and grab. So you got to find that sweet spot between leaving enough moves for having guys you can pick up due to injury, guys, who are getting extended run at the end of the season. B, you need to make it in alignment with your opponents guys and who they have playing, because you don't want to miss out on the low volume days, yet you don't want to overstream on the day where you don't need it. And lastly, you want to be able to stream, with the long streams, as we like to call it, right? Because listen, if that guy has a 5-game week and he's going to be getting more run, if you don't get him on a Thursday or Friday in your current matchup, he might be gone by then. People are just trying to get that next hot guy. So it's a different way of thinking. But, you kind of have to think about those three things in mind and always be thinking forward, because once you survive and win that week, it's on to the next one. And you got to remember, as you go on, there's less teams. People are a lot more, merciless. But who can I drop, And then you have some of the better players getting dropped, and it's like we're all just playing for a week trying to get that champion, just trying to get that championship. So.
Well, that brings up a really good point, Marcus. If you're one of those teams who is in good shape and you look like you're going to win your week, watch for guys to get dropped like that who may be hurt right now, and guys are desperate and they're cutting them, but they're going to be back in a week or two, and you could get them in the championship. Some guy cuts AD, some guy cuts LeBron, some guy cuts Lowry. If you probably still be around then? Like I'm in first in one of my dynasty leagues, and I have so many guys hurt, but I'm still beating this guy somehow. Like, I'm still winning. So I'm watching the waiver wire. And it's a dynasty, so it's a little different. But a lot of leagues, you're watching the wire, like someone's going to get desperate and cut somebody that is going to help me in 2 weeks, when it gets heavy. So keep an eye out for those too, if you're in that other position. And one last thing I wanted to point out, Alan, when Mark was saying, reminded me of a strategy. And I don't know if you want to call this like Weasley or, however you want to refer to it. But remember, if you pick up a guy and then you drop you tip most leagues, he's got to go through like a 3-day waiver wire process, or you can't just like pick him up right away. So if you think about it, and like the other team is desperate for guys, or there's a guy in their team and you see that guy's injury replacement available or something like that, you could pick him up and play him or just drop him. Sometimes if you drop too fast, it doesn't count it, but there's a game to be played there and a strategy to be played with making guys not available for those other owners to grab at certain times. Some people might think it's, not cool, but it's totally within the rules and it's for money. So in most cases, so I'm not above it.
If you can swing it, if it fits within the parameters of the system, it's not shady. You got to do what you got to do.
Change the rules next season if you don't like it. Yeah.
So just as a reminder, y'all, if you guys have questions about your own teams or just in particular general question about strategy, by all means, feel free to drop it in the chat. If it's about your own team, try and give as many details as possible so we can help out, because so much of this is just it's all very situational. It's about your matchup, it's about your team build. It's all as many details as you can offer. But feel free to participate. We'd love to hear your all thoughts as well. And of course, if you're just joining in with us now, please drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Goes a long way, and you all know. So I do like the idea of the sort of like the little the little nudge there, like playing against that your teammate or not your teammate, your opponent might really want this guy that you're dropping.
We're not on the same team. That's my money.
Marcus, I want to throw someone back at you too. I'm curious and I'm going to ask this for both of you. What is the threshold for you to get? I mean, like, what level of player do you give the most leash to in these types of playoff situations? Like, let's not talk about injured guys, because if they're laying goose eggs, then they're obviously cuts. But let's say you have
not always. Yeah.
I mean, that's true, not always. But like, let's talk about. I mean, let's say that you've got a consistent top 50 player all year long, and you know that and let's just say he's been slumping recently. Mccall Bridges is an interesting example. He's had a couple of games recently where he's done absolutely nothing. Where do you draw the line? Is there a point where you have this productive player where you just decide, I can't deal with this right now, I can't deal with the inconsistency, I need to go out and get someone better? Is there a player that's too valuable for you to do that with? Like, where's your line on that type of situation?
So I've always been a firm believer of setting your team up where you have one or two stream spots, because you can be more expendable in that regard. So with that logic, let's say I have Mccall Bridges and he hasn't been playing well. There should be one or two guys I can afford to drop who should be rotating spots on each week anyway. But you have to ask yourself, if you feel like you're being outbeat, because, Brent kind of mentioned this earlier, you're kind of at the mercy of the people who have health and the higher standings on their side. Because while Brent may be in first place and I'm in fourth or fifth, it may take me to drop a Mccall Bridges in order to end up beating the opponent that I'm playing. And Brent, who maybe has that bye week, could be at liberty to just pick up on McCall as a speculative ad. So I think, you should have a good feel for who's on your team, what spots are more expendable, who can you kind of stream in and out. But that's not always the case because it's situational per week. It's situational with you got this guy, top 50, like you said, Alan, then he's not playing or he's not playing well. Turns out on top of that, he only has a game or two left in the schedule, right?
Mhm.
If he's not playing, can you afford to just hold on to him? Because it's all to no avail if you're not advancing, So
Yeah.
you really have to use your best judgment. You got to remember, in most leagues, it's only 3 weeks as is. So if you land a playoff spot, you're probably, unless you got a bye week, you're playing that first week, obviously, then semis, and then what would be finals. At least that's how it is in the league I play in. So,
Yeah.
3 weeks is not a long time, especially if a team has fewer amount of games. So you know what a player is going to give you. You're obviously just not going to be dropping just very good guys because you shouldn't have to. If you have depth and continuity on your roster, you know who to drop. But it's one thing if I have a Mccall Bridges and I'm saying, hey, he's playing well. I know he's going to get better as the season goes on type deal because that's what we think about in fantasy, right? Like, this guy's good. He has sustainable value. But that's all condensed, as the season comes to an end. So you got to use your best judgment of that. And I always say, I kind of draw the line at, honestly, I think top 50 is about where I draw the line. Only if you're playing like a top 50 player and you have the right amount of games. I'm not going to drop a guy who's playing well, but, you heard Brent. Kyle Lowry's probably been playing at a top 35, top 40 player. If he's not playing and he's not out there, we can't marvel over the idea of Kyle Lowry is so good, I got to keep him. He's not doing you much good if he's not playing. If he gets to that 5-game week and he's playing 2 of the 5, and you got Fred VanVleet who's having hip issues and still has to serve a 1-game suspension when he gets back, right? It's just looking at guys in a different way, because all of those factors play a crucial part. So,
yeah, it's like it's do or die. It's do or die
exactly.
time. And so for me, it's a very small list of guys that I really won't, that I'll hang on to. And they have to be guys that are like absurd production type of guys, like that have the production of like, I'm not Giannis Antetokounmpo, Anthony Davis, LeBron James. I'm hanging on to those guys and hoping. I mean, the first whiff of negative news where like there could be a shutdown, it could be another 2 weeks where that's like, we're pretty much right up to the finals where I'm not going to be if I don't do something and get some kind of stats. But it's also, you really have to pay attention to, every day you got to look and see where you're at in your matchup with the team you're playing. If you're way ahead in rebounds or something like that, and you have AD on the bench or you're way ahead in blocks, then, don't drop them because you're already good. You got it covered on rebound and blocks. Look in other areas to come up with those other spots. Don't drop AD to pick up another center when you already got those stats covered. So if you're going to win, if you're going to win anyway, hang on to them. What was it Steven said yesterday? He thinks of it as like when you're drinking ice water and you're drinking and the ice cubes are just hanging on. You want those ice cubes to hang on as long as possible before they fall on your face and everything. And to me, my ice cubes are probably first or second round guys. Anything past that, totally expendable, willing to cut bait right away. And Lowry would kind of fall into that area. Like CJ McCollum's type of guys, or whatever would kind of fall into that. And Mccall Bridges for sure would fall into that area. And you got it. Once you do it, you can't look back. And you know what?
You can't do FOMO. You
might be able to grab them back too. Yeah. If you do end up pulling out the win, you might be able to grab them back. Because if other teams may not have a spot for him, or they might have to drop someone to pick him up, which leaves another opportunity for you. You never know. How it's going to go, but you gotta win this week. So if you're going to win, hang on to those guys. If you need to make a move, make the move. Don't second guess yourself because you did what you had to do. Even, the guys in the league might give you crap because you dropped a good player and someone picked him up and won the league because he came back and was awesome. But that rarely happens. Usually if you make the cut, it's because you read something or saw something that means they're not coming back anytime soon.
it's important to rely on context too. Like, I don't think we're suggesting to make rash decisions. Like if you have a quality player and they had like a bad game,
bad games are different. Yeah.
You got to think about foul trouble. You got to look at the context, like the game script. You got to watch these games, see what might have been happening. It's more about like if you've noticed a noticeable continuous trend down that had been occurring like the weeks before, like just kind of leading up to that point. If you can explain it based off of, I don't know, like maybe the player came back from an injury and they're not fully healthy yet. Maybe there's the rotations being switched up a little bit because this team's fighting for playoff positioning and they're trying to get other guys who are helping a little bit more than perhaps this player might be at the moment, get them more involved. Like it's really important for you to really watch the games and understand the context for why things may be happening. But to read a little bit into it, follow these beat reporters on Twitter, read some of these articles, just understanding why things are happening. So it's a hands-on process to be sure, but especially if money's on the line, it's definitely worth to go that extra mile and just really understand why things are happening. Try and don't leave things up to chance and don't play guessing games. You really just want to have a very clear picture.
Man, that's a great point, Alan. Like, if a guy's been great all year, like Mccall Bridges or something like that, and they have a bad game, we're not saying, cut that guy. But if someone like Theo Maladone or somebody has a couple bad games or, someone, who hasn't been great all year, who's just kind of come out, but now, maybe maybe someone got healthy and now their minutes are going down or something like that. I'm willing to cut those guys much more quickly than someone who's done great all year and maybe had a bad game. So you got to look at that for sure. Karl Anthony Towns misses a couple games. It's not for health reasons. It's just for personal stuff. I'm giving him a long leash because, and he comes back. I'm not freaking out about that. Yeah, it sucks. It sucks when they postpone a game, but that's not a reason to cut guys. But those average to below average guys who maybe had a hot streak for a week or two, so you picked them up later in the season, they start struggling, I'm willing to move on real quick from those guys for whoever the hot hand is right now.
Yeah. But something else to mention with that, Brent, building off what you're saying about the cat thing, I remember about 2 or 3 years ago, I had Anthony Davis on his last years in New Orleans, right? And it was obviously clear he was just kind of not playing. He was just nursing an injury. And I was in the semifinals, and it was risky. I actually dropped him to pick up Christian Wood because he was getting extended run. And Christian Wood ended up winning me the matchup. And ironically, the guy I was playing picked up Anthony Davis. And I'm like, is he going to play? Which he didn't. But that's another thing to pay attention to because you have that unique dynamic in teams where a guy's being rested they're just not really playing for anything, and you see other guys getting that developmental time, as we like to call it, right? You don't want to cling too hard onto a guy if you're in the final week or the last week, because then it's all or nothing. So you want to be keen on who's really getting the run, and it's not saying Cat misses a game and Naz Reid plays 35 minutes and balls out, you have to go grab him. But you can kind of sense what the team's playing for or what they aren't. And just what the organization's doing. Are they resting guys? Are they just kind of, letting these other guys get a shot? Because once you kind of get to that point, it becomes league winning, or league losing rather, if you hold or grab guys. So you definitely want to pay attention to the trends.
Yeah, and this is the time of year where you want to watch for teams that have either like clinched a good playoff spot or they're out of it for sure, because that's when, let's say Philadelphia clinches that seed and they're not going to be able to get any better seed. Maybe a guy like Shake Milton or something like that is all of a sudden going to win your fantasy league for you because they're going to rest Ben Simmons. They're going to rest those guys. Those are the guys to keep an eye on. So watch the teams and the standings and what they're doing. And great point, Marcus, about guys resting. Because look, Naz Reid is probably a smart pickup because who knows? You don't want to drop Karl Anthony Towns, but he's probably a good pickup because who knows what's going to happen with Cat, towards the end of the year, how much they're going to rest him. And we know that Naz Reid goes off when Cat's not there. So guys like that are really important to keep an eye on.
And I think it's also important too, though, I mean, because so much of this stuff is about you're looking in advance, but you're also making sure that you are your roster is fully equipped for the right here and now. Like you want to make moves that kind of straddle both lines, and that it's tough to rely on players that like in like a stashing capacity. Like you can only anticipate so far in advance to the point where it actually help you. Like if you're waiting on DeAndre Hunter to get an update and get it back into your lineup, just cut ties.
Yeah.
There's no point in waiting that long. If you got Killian Hayes on your roster, kind of waiting for him to ascend to the starting point guard role and start. We're no longer at that point anymore. It was great 2 weeks ago. It's not great now. I mean, it's just you gotta make sure that it's a tough line to sort of straddle. It's just to be. I keep using straddle. I don't know. That's like a weird word, but you know what? It's fine. Y'all know what I'm getting at. Like, it's just you gotta find those moves that help you in the immediate, but also have a forward, leaning glance, and that's where long streaming comes into play. It's definitely more focused towards that than sort of watching for potential, which is kind of it's a tough gear to shift because that's where we've been all year. Every time you guys tune into these shows, you're looking for our takes on who we think could emerge later on, who has upside, who would be great if they get to that minute threshold. It's a different set of rules now that we're at this point.
Well, look, you got to get the guys that are producing right now. I take this kind of this stance all season. I hate stashing people. That's why I don't have Jaren Jackson Jr. on any of my teams because I was not. He could come back and be amazing and be in a 7th round, miracle pick. But I would much rather have the guy that I know is going to play. And once in a while, I'm going to be like, dang, that was a great pickup. Good job, getting Jackson in the 7th round or whatever. But that rarely happens. So, you have to play the odds and then just be willing to live with the consequences. It's a lot like playing blackjack. Like, if the dealer's showing a face card and you have a 6 showing, you should hit. Like the odds say you should hit, but 80% of the time you're going to lose, but that's still the right move. And so you have to hit it and live with it. It's the same thing with fantasy sports. You're gambling, you're going to have to take a gamble and you're going to lose sometimes with it. But when it does, you have to take what the high percentage play is, the highest percentage play. And that's a guy who's actually putting up production is usually, and the closer you get to that championship game, the higher those percentages go for playing the guy with production, because the less likely that guy's going to come back. And even if that guy does come back, you're only getting a game or two where you already got 4 or 5 games out of another guy who maybe not quite as good, but at least it's points.
So I think we should get to the point where we start putting a bow on this thing here, but I want to leave you two both with some parting thoughts. If you were, to the listeners now and to any of you who watch this video after broadcast, Marcus, let's start with you. What is we've touched on a lot of things already, and maybe you'll repeat yourself with this answer, but it's fine. What is the one piece of advice you would leave from this point forward for those of you who are getting ready to get into the playoffs?
Okay. Yeah. You know what? I just relate it to my own team. Like, for example, right now I'm battling for to stay 3rd. I could go down to a 4th seed, right? I'm not going to get a bye week. Every week going forward is one for me to just stay alive. So going back to those 3 points I kind of mentioned earlier is, the players who are expendable on your team, it's kind of like we've been talking about. Brent went as far to say if they're not a 1st or 2nd, then they could arguably be cut bait. Each player on your team who is already expendable gets that much more expendable, right? If you only have one IR spot, you can have a bunch of guys who are out on your team. If you have guys who are on the cusp, don't be afraid to cut those guys. You want to make sure that you're maximizing your streams. And as I said before, you're optimizing your streams. And B, kind of like I said, you want to align your schedule and your streams with what your opponent has going on. You don't know it or not. If there's a day during that matchup where you have 10 guys playing and they have 3, that's such huge leverage, right? If you're able to maintain pace, and then you don't have to stream as much later on, and you can save those streams for my next point when you're looking forward, right? And you're doing the long streams on your team. So it's really, really matchup dependent. That's the thing I want to be the biggest takeaway. Once you get into playoffs, it's matchup dependent. Now, obviously, we have head-to-head matchups, so you're playing one person, but it's so much more matchup dependent as you may have more flexibility than your opponent and vice versa. And that all comes down to how you stream, how you end up, managing your week just to get on. So those three things you want to remember. You want to optimize your streams. You don't want to just use too many too. You also want to keep 2 or 3 to have on that Thursday through Sunday when you're looking ahead so you can pick up those other players. And you want to know what your opponent's doing and who they have playing. Because to flip it, if there's a big day where they have a lot more guys, you might have to plan more accordingly. And you might not even have that luxury to stream ahead because you're just streaming to win that matchup. So, I think those are the 3 biggest things for me.
Brent, your parting thoughts?
Yeah, those are really great. That's really great advice too. My thoughts. My biggest thing I could say to anyone is pay attention. Your guys are going to have 2-game weeks. Some team's going to cut bait on them. They might have a 5-game week the next week. You're winning your matchup. Grab that guy. When he's available, when you see him, and if you're losing, you might be the guy who has to drop that guy with a 2-game week and get someone else. You gotta be a little, I don't know, ballsy, I guess, right now to win. I mean, that's what it takes. You make it this far. You don't want to be the guy who was first place in the regular season, but then lost because, you weren't willing to cut somebody like a Lowry or something like. I know we keep saying Lowry. I don't know if he's cuttable or not, honestly. But
you and your
he's just one that comes
against
to mind.
Kyle Lowry.
I have him on like 3 playoff teams right now, and it's driving me crazy. That's why he's
personal.
Top of mind. But look, guys, you want to look out for on the waiver wire. Look at Kem Birch. He's getting a lot of run tonight and is playing really well. Daniel Gafford. Birch just went to Toronto and is actually getting playing time. Keep an eye on him. Facundo Campazzo, Will Barton, those guys are going to get a boost in minutes. Monte Morris is going to get a boost. There's guys who are out there on your wire who can help you right now. And you give up on Lauri Markkanen. Get rid of Blank. I've been telling you to drop Brandon Clark for 6 months. Get rid of them. There's these guys that they're just not doing anything for you. Go and pick up these guys who are actually going to do something. And if those guys have a great game here or there, don't kick yourself over it. You made the smart move. It's like hitting 16 against a 10. You're going to lose most of the time, but you made the smart move. You can't doubt yourself. So just do that and pay attention to what the other teams are doing. Use strategy. If you can pick a guy up, play him a game, and then drop him, and no one else can pick him up for 3 days, do it. Screw the other guy over. This is gambling, play to win. That's what I say, or don't play at all. So, you got to be smart. And if the Thursday we get bad news on AD, or it's another 2 weeks and you're losing your matchup, cut him. Go get someone else. Even if he's going to come back in 10 days and play, if you lose, it doesn't matter. You have a healthy AD, but your team's not, you pull it up and you're not going against anybody because you lost. You have to be willing to do that. So that would be my advice. Just pay attention and make the smart move, even if it doesn't work out.
Great insight from both of you. Definitely, I'm in agreement with all your points. It's just it's a lot of strategy, especially I think a lot of our analysis has been more focused towards 9 category formats. Those where the extra layers of strategy really lie. It's all about winning at least 5 categories in this playoffs. Whereas in a points league, you just keep rolling guys out there who will just put up anything for you. For me, I guess my parting advice is just put in the work now, starting right now. Get off once you're done with this stream here. Go take a look at your week next week. See where the holes are on your roster. See where the games stack up. Where you could find other people. Look at the schedule for next week. There's plenty of resources out there. HoopBall has got a schedule grid, especially if you're a Fantasy Pass subscriber. You should take advantage of that. Just start the preparation now. It will go a long way. You have a moves limit this week. Save them for Save them for towards the end and use them for next week. Use every advantage that you can come up with. Keep in mind that at the end of the day, the only thing that matters, the biggest deciding factor here, is games played versus games played. Your opponent has 36, you want 42. You want that advantage. It will ultimately win at the end of the day. It doesn't matter who is getting that production for you. So just be forward thinking. Put in your work now. It will pay off for you later. And hey, hit us up. We're always around. We're happy to help too. Again, thank you guys for your time today on the show. You guys can follow them.
If you want points league advice really quick. Don't leave games on the table. Make sure you max out all your positions.
I thought you were about to say don't play points leagues.
Well,
that's what it sounded like that was leading there.
That's a whole other show. Yeah.
I have no qualms with that. And you know, but hey, these guys are great. Follow them on Twitter. Yeah. They're both at their handles right there at the bottom of the screen. You follow me at mine as well. Follow HoopBall on Twitter at HoopBall Fantasy for late breaking updates with fantasy analysis attached. And subscribe to the channel if you like what you heard here today and you want to hear more content like this. We got you. Coming up this Friday, I'm going to be joined by David Williams of HoopBall Grizzlies. He and I are going to do a Roto preview. Not preview, end of season wrap up, and yeah, it'll be great. So thanks everyone. We'll check in with you next time, and good luck.
Thanks guys.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks Alan.